Welcome to the Health Workforce Technical Assistance Center's webinar series. This presentation is entitled Presenting Data Using Online Interactive Dashboards, the Washington State Health Workforce Sentinel Network Experience, and it was presented by Benjamin Stubbs and Amy Clark on May 23rd, 2018. Welcome to the Health Workforce Technical Assistance Center's webinar series. My name is David Armstrong, and today's presentation focuses on presenting data using online interactive dashboards. Our presenters are Benjamin Stubbs and Amy Clark, both from the University of Washington's Center for Health Workforce Studies. After the presentation, you may ask questions using the chat panel on the right of your screen. Make sure you send your questions to all panelists to ensure that they have an opportunity to be answered. Also, when the event ends, you'll be directed to a short evaluation survey, so please take a few moments to provide us with your feedback. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn the event over to our presenters. Ben, Amy?
Thank you, David. Let me bring up the PowerPoint here. Okay, hopefully you all can see that. Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks again to David and the team at the Health Workforce Technical Assistance Center for having us here today and allowing us to share our experiences. I'm Ben Stubbs. I'm a research scientist here at the University of Washington.
And I'm Amy Clark. I'm the web computing specialist for the University of Washington's Department of Family Medicine, and I also do the web assets for CHOOOSE and our other research centers. So, as David mentioned, we're here to talk about our experiences with a project called the Sentinel Network, and specifically we'll talk about our experiences creating and deploying online interactive dashboards to present the data and the information we've gathered for this project. Before I jump into that, I just wanted to recognize the incredible team that works on the Sentinel Network at both the University of Washington and the Washington State Workforce Board. And actually, this presentation today came about because of a webinar that Sue Skillman did back in March in this very forum. And in that webinar, she presented some background on the Sentinel Network, some initial findings, and presented some case summaries that demonstrated the usefulness and the need for a project like this. And one of the things that came out of that presentation in March in the evaluation that someone submitted after that webinar, we got the following comment. Could you see if the team would be willing to do part 2 of this webinar where they could sketch out the process for building the Tableau visualization, the mistakes they made in their early attempts, and how they learned from them to make the upgrading process more streamlined? So I put that quote on there just as an introduction and talk about the motivation behind the webinar today. And just to say that there will be some technical aspects to what Amy and I will be talking about today. In fact, I think Amy is maybe going to talk about the server setup that we use to deploy the visualizations on a website, which, you know, despite being a really fascinating topic in and of itself, really there are some implications that are important to think about with that. So even though you may think you never would have thought about servers and that type of information, we just want to point out some issues around that. So all that is to say there will be some technical aspects to the webinar where we'll talk about computational and analytical requirements that we ran into and how we address those. But we also, Amy and I think both, made an effort to step back and think about some big picture questions, some more general questions about dashboard design and very basic user experience with interactive dashboards. So hopefully, you know, based on our experience, that information will be useful to you. So what I'll do is I'll start with some background about what is the Sentinel Network and what kind of information we gather. Then I'll talk about some of the dashboard design requirements that we had, and I'll show an example of the dashboards, the online dashboards that we created and some of the interactive features of that. And then I'll kind of circle back to some of the design requirements and talk about the decisions we made and some questions or lessons learned that came up based on those decisions. And then I'll turn it over to Amy
She'll talk about some of the technical aspects, hardware and software details, pluses and minuses of some of the tools we chose. She'll talk about some privacy concerns and some cost factors that went into creating these dashboards. And then I just wanted to kind of finish this introduction with a little disclaimer that, of course, this is all based on our experience with this project. And I think you'll see that there are some features or aspects of the way we went about it that may be unique to our situation. But again, we did make an effort to step back and provide some more general lessons learned that hopefully will be helpful. So that said, what is the Sentinel Network and what kind of information are we trying to convey with these dashboards? Especially in this environment of rapid healthcare transformation, there's a need to understand how the healthcare workforce is being deployed and where improvements can be made. But keeping up with the pace of change can be challenging, and also answering new questions that come up kind of as they arise can be difficult, especially when considering some of the traditional data sources that are often used in this field. So for example, there may be questions about what are the skills and roles needed by employers, and are they different in different regions of or employers requesting different things in different regions of the United States or in different regions of a particular state? What are new approaches that people are using to retain employees or to train existing employees to meet new needs? And what are those new needs that they're trying to address with those efforts? So the Sentinel Network was developed as an effort to answer these types of questions and identify emerging signals of healthcare workforce demand needs. This is done by gathering information from a small number of trusted partners, which could consist of employers, recruiters, policymakers, educators. And so it's a small number rather than, say, a comprehensive survey of all employers in a state. And there's also an effort to gather information every 4 to 6 months so that we can quickly spot new trends and have many points at which to assess changes as they occur. Another important aspect of this effort is the network. So it's not just about data collection, it's about forming partnerships, facilitating discussions about the information that's collected, and empowering those partners to take action. So this is a quick graphical illustration of what the Sentinel Network is and how it works. So as I mentioned on the left in the blue box there are our partners that provide information. We sometimes refer to them as Sentinels. So every 4 to 6 months, we open up an online survey tool and recruit and ask our trusted partners to provide information to that online survey tool. That information is then collected and processed and lightly coded, and that's represented in the data hub in the middle, and then quickly made available to the network, to the partners in education, training, policy, that can take in the information and make decisions and take action based on what we're finding. And then that cycle repeats every 4 to 6 months. So it's an iterative process and really is meant to identify emerging signals of workforce demand needs. Just, specific to the topic today of creating online dashboards, there are a few features of the Sentinel Network that influence how we decided to present the information in our dashboard. One is that it's important that the data are made available quickly so that, we can identify these emerging trends as they're happening. The second is that the data need to be made available to all partners. So that means that we went with an online dissemination strategy rather than, sending reports to a smaller number of people. And finally, as I mentioned before, the data need to be updated every 4 to 6 months. So that means that the process of updating the dashboards needs to be efficient so that we can get that information out there quickly. So just some quick information about what data are gathered at each data collection point. The Sentinel employers or the partners who provide information register. They provide some contact information, some information about the organization they work for. They indicate the facility type they work with or for, so hospitals versus FQHCs versus skilled nursing facilities. And then some information about the locations in which those facilities are located, and that's at the county level in the state of Washington. Then for each facility type that the Sentinel indicates, they are asked to select from a list of occupations that are based on SOC codes and select occupations that have experienced some sort of demand change in the past 3 to 4 months. And then the subsequent questions are all related to the selections they make at the beginning. So ask them to talk more about the occupations that are experiencing change. And so what exactly are they asked to talk about? For each, there's a set of 6 domains or questions that we developed to try to kind of reach the breadth of issues that could be affecting the workforce on an ongoing basis. The first, we asked the Sentinels to talk about any occupations that are experiencing exceptionally long vacancies, then occupations with increased or decreased demand in the previous 3 to 4 months, then to talk about any occupations that they did not previously employ, and then new roles for existing employees, changes to orientation or onboarding procedures for new employees that they're bringing on, or somewhat related changes to training priorities for existing employees. But more than just asking, have you been experiencing difficulties or changes, we asked them to provide comments about why they may be experiencing these things or what types of things they've done to address their needs. So there really is a deep and rich pool of qualitative information that comes out of this effort. And we really worked hard to try to highlight that qualitative information in the dashboards that we created. But, you know, as you see, that has some challenges to it that I think we're still working on a little bit and hope to improve even more in the future. So just a quick timeline of the project to date. The first data collection round was in June, July of 2016. We've done 4 data collection rounds so far, which we called phase 1, based mostly on kind of the funding source changed recently. So phase 2, we have a new funder, which is great to have been able to get some ongoing funding to continue the project. So our next data collection round, this says June of this year, probably will be more like July of this year, and then we hope to do 1 more data collection round in the following months. But this is just to point out that, you know, data collection was done every 4 months in phase 1 and will be more like every 6 months in phase 2. So that just to emphasize the quick turnaround that was needed to take in information and then make it available to our partners. So that was a, you know, really quick run through of what the Sentinel Network is and what kind of information we collect. But what I want to do now is kind of take all of us back to 2 years ago when we were starting to think about, okay, given this information that we're collecting, what are we going to do with it and how are we going to present it to our partners? So I want to talk about some of the discussions we had around design decisions for creating the dashboards that we eventually created. So some of the initial requirements that we talked about are that we wanted the dashboards or the, you know, information presentation portal, whatever you want to call it, we wanted to make those interactive. And part of the reason for that is that the Sentinel Network it really brings in partners from a lot of different areas. You know, we have employers, we have policymakers, educators, researchers, and all of those partners will be coming at the information from different experiences and perspectives. So as much as possible, we wanted to allow all those different types of partners to explore the data from different angles and really allow them to come up with a wide range of interpretations and solutions to the problems that are presented. The second requirement was that we wanted the dashboard to be scalable. I guess what I mean by scalable is thinking specifically of the dashboards themselves. As we gather more information and have more data collection rounds, those dashboards need to grow to accommodate that additional information. So how are we going to do that? I think scalable is usually thought of as, you know, you start with a small group of respondents or a small geographic area, and then you expand to larger areas. That wasn't so much what we were thinking about at the very beginning, although it turns out that that has been an issue recently as we've gotten requests from other states to, you know, help them employ a similar approach in their state. So in the long run, that type of scalability also became an issue that we talked about. But what I'll talk about today is really focused on the dashboard design itself and allowing the dashboard to grow as we collect more information. Another requirement we had is that we wanted to present unabridged data. Part of the goal of the Sentinel Network is to really put the onus or expectation on our partners that they are the drivers of this activity. So really make all of the information available to the partners so that they can explore it and come up with conclusions and ways to address the needs that come up. So we didn't want to have a dashboard that's, you know, a very summarized version of the data. We wanted to present the data in as raw form as possible, so to speak. But the other side of that is that we also wanted to protect the identities of the Sentinels who are providing this information. We think that's important because we want the Sentinels to be candid. We want them to tell us what their experiences are and not fear that, you know, someone will be able to say, hey, I saw you said such and such, and, you know, what did you mean by that? So that type of privacy protection. So of course we can address some of that by aggregating data and presenting it in a certain way within the dashboards, but we found there are also some issues we had to think about as far as what data are available for download to users of the system. So Amy will talk about that in more detail. Then finally, 2 additional requirements. Time, you know, as I mentioned, we're gathering data every 4 months, so we had to make the dashboards quickly and make them available quickly. And then, of course, cost, which involved, you know, so to speak, direct costs like staff salaries, software licenses, costs related to web hosting, but also involved time and resource costs, such as the time it takes to design and develop a dashboard, and also some of the marketing efforts that went into it. But don't forget, one of our goals is fostering partnership. So that takes a lot of time and effort to keep those relationships going. Things like testing the dashboards, making sure they work right. So those things all you know, can be categorized as costs. I think today we'll focus mostly on some of the more direct costs, monetary costs, but just wanted to mention those others to keep in mind. So we also talked 2 years ago about the resources we had available. We needed an online survey tool. We have used Qualtrics in our group previously, and so we had a license for it and had some experience using it, so we went with that. We needed to process the data somewhat, so we had someone in-house that was experienced with R, so we just decided to go with that as our data processing tool. And I should say a lot of the decisions around what tools we used had a lot to do with what were our available resources as far as personnel, the time it would take to do things, the cost, et cetera. So I think those factors drove a lot of these decisions about what tools we used. Then we needed some way to create the visualization and then also share it with the world on a website. So we talked about or considered 3 options mainly, Tableau, a package for R called R Shiny, and then Java libraries such as V3. We pretty quickly ruled out Java libraries because, I think we realized that would give us a lot of flexibility and control over what we were doing, but the learning curve was really, really steep with that, and we didn't have anyone in-house who knew how to use those types of Java tools, so we ruled that out pretty quickly. We considered the R tools that are available, specifically R Shiny, which it's a nice tool that allows you to take the visualizations, charts, graphs, et cetera, that you create in R and make them interactive and post them on a web environment. The cost around R Shiny is relatively reasonable. There's a free version that allows you to make a very limited number of visualizations or dashboards and allows a limited number of visitors to use those dashboards every month. But then there's also, you can pay as little as $3,000 per year to get unlimited number of dashboards and unlimited number of users. And then they have more expensive options at $10,000 to $25,000 a year that give you all the bells and whistles. But really the real deal breaker with R was that, at least when we were initially doing this design work, the default was to allow the source data to be downloadable by all the users of the dashboard. And since we had this privacy concern, we wanted to protect the identity of our Sentinels. That was kind of a deal breaker, so we weren't able to use R as our tool at that time. Although I think they've changed that now. You can now control access to data, but at the time we were starting, you didn't have that option. So we went with Tableau. There's a little bit of a learning curve with Tableau, but not as steep as some of the other options I mentioned here. And our institution, the University of Washington, works closely with Tableau, which gave us some options for an academic license, some more control over privacy options, and so Amy will talk about some of those details in a bit. And then finally, we needed a website, and we used the website that was hosted by our funder, and Amy will talk about some of those details. So I'll give a quick demonstration of the dashboards that we created, and so you can see, based on some of those design requirements, what we ended up doing. So if you go to the Sentinel Network website, I can click here on View Findings, and I'm taken to a page where I can explore an overview of the findings by facility type, or findings by geographic region. So if I click on Overview of Findings, I have a few options. I can do some kind of canned reports, or I can look at response counts by facility type. And this is where we present some of the summary information about how many responses did we get in each data collection round from each facility type. So some of the quantitative information that comes out of the Sentinel Network. You can also explore based on geographic region. So these are different regions of the state of Washington. How many responses did we get? And you can filter that to look at, say, skilled nursing facilities. How many responses did we get in each data collection round? Or filter that by geographic region of the state. So you can look at this region of the state and see, okay, there, how many skilled nursing facilities did we get in each round? So some basic summary information about who is providing information in each data collection round and what types of facilities are they representing. I can go back to the main findings page, and I mentioned that we really wanted to feature the qualitative information that we gather. So we decided to do that by allowing users to explore the data by facility type or geographic region. So if I click on findings by facility type, I get some buttons here that allow me to navigate to the different domains that we asked about, vacancies, demand, increase or decrease, onboarding, training, etc. So if I go to the vacancies question, I can then select the facility types that I'm interested in looking at. I could select all of them, or say I'm interested in skilled nursing facilities and intermediate care facilities. So that kind of limits or allows me to focus on the information I'm really interested in. I can change the data collection rounds I'm looking at, so maybe select the most recent two. And I can change the number of occupations that are shown in each data collection round. So then looking at this, I can look at the occupations that Sentinels from skilled nursing facilities and intermediate care facilities reported as experiencing prolonged vacancies during the 3 to 4 months before each data collection round. More importantly, I can hover over this bar for each occupation and get some information about exactly how many Sentinels are reporting for each occupation. And then if I click on this bar, it brings up another set of bars that contain the qualitative information that we've gathered. And we did some light coding of the qualitative information to put the different comments into categories. So, for example, this category is not enough qualified applicants for registered nurses. Recruitment, retention problems not related to salary or benefits. So we tried to group the comments in such a way that facilitated the exploration of the comments. And then if the user hovers over one of these squares in each bar, you get the exact comment that was provided by the Sentinel. So demand exceeds supply in this case, extreme limited availability in the area, probably geographic area, and extreme competition to attract employees, et cetera. So that's how we decided to present the qualitative information. Then the user can navigate to the different questions. For example, this one was about training of existing employees and can explore the data in a similar way by selecting facility types and exploring the comments. So if I go back to the main findings page, just to show, again, we can explore by facility type or geographic region. If I look at geographic region of the state, again, I have the option to navigate to the different questions that we asked, and then I can navigate the data, again, by selecting the data collection periods that I'm interested in. So maybe select the most recent two, and, similarly, instead of presenting the information by facility type, now it is presented by geographic region of the state. And I can limit that by clicking on this map and limiting it to 1 or 2 geographic regions and see the data that are provided there. And again, click on the bar and I can access the comments that are provided by the Sentinel. So I'm going to switch back to the PowerPoint presentation and wanted to talk about some of the more big picture questions that our design decisions brought up. So I call these solutions in quotes because, it's what we decided to do, and, I think it works relatively well for what we wanted to do, but there are some questions and lessons learned that I wanted to talk about. So the first design requirement that I talked about is we wanted interactive dashboards, interactive data presentation. Tableau makes it relatively easy to do that and create functional and attractive visualizations, but there are a few questions that we're still dealing with that I wanted to bring up. The first is, one thing you might want to think about is, what is the best way to help users navigate the dashboard? Your users will probably have different levels of familiarity and comfort in working with interactive visualizations or websites in general. So how do you provide something that will work for all of those different experiences and levels of comfort? So one thing we did, if I go back to the website with our visualizations, is we provided some text instructions, for example, up here, to click on the map to show the geographic region you want to explore, then select the data collection period, and then click on the bar to show the comments, the reasons. But, I think the nature of this visualization is that it's very attractive and colorful, so I think the eye is drawn, not necessarily drawn to those instructions. And so the user may not even see those and may kind of struggle with, well, okay, what do I do with this, picture that's presented to me on the website? So that's something we've struggled with. We talked about, doing maybe linking to a video tutorial or doing some sort of page capture approach to show people how to navigate. But, as of now, we've stuck with the text instructions. So another consideration is how will your dashboard or visualization look in different browsers or screens? We were kind of lucky in that Tableau takes care of a lot of that for us. I think compared to, talking to some other people who have used other tools, a struggle can be making sure that, testing in all different browsers and different, years, releases of browsers, versions of browsers, and making sure things don't break depending on what people are using to view your visualization. Tableau takes care of a lot of those details for us. But you might also think about, people now more and more are using their phones for even things like this, looking at, kind of rich data sources. So is that going to be a factor that you want to consider, and again, Tableau handles a lot of those details for us. These visualizations actually look pretty good on my phone. It resizes nicely and handles the data refreshes nicely, et cetera. So, but even if you're expecting your users to work primarily on desktop screens, you might want to consider color selection, sizing, things like that. So just some things to think about. And then, finally, maybe this is a comment more on my skills, not speaking for Amy, but, I'm a researcher by training, so how do I translate those skills into, web design? It's hard to be good at both of those things. So I think my comment about that is a team approach has been really helpful for us. Amy's expertise has been invaluable and great. And also, we did bring in some consultants at one point to take a look at the dashboards we had created and give some suggestions for improvements and changes. So something to consider is experts in the field of web design and how you can make use of those skills. A second requirement that I talked about is we needed to make updates every 4 months, and there are two aspects to this. We needed the data in the dashboards to grow as we added more information, and we also needed to do the updates quickly. So speaking of the kind of time constraint, how we need to quickly turn around the data, the qualitative nature of the data we're gathering does require some processing by hand before we can make it available on the website. We need to de-identify a few, review the comments, make sure we de-identify anything that could identify the respondent, and we do a little bit of light coding of the comments to put them into categories just to make it a little bit easier to present that information. So that said, there is a process I have to go through in R where I do that and convert the raw data into a format and content that we'll use for our dashboards. Tableau makes it relatively easy to connect to updated data sources, and then the dashboard is updated relatively automatically. I say relatively because in our case, I need to make some changes to some of the, I can say, okay, look at this new Excel spreadsheet that I've created and make that the basis for the dashboard, but I need to make some changes to some of the filter settings and, for example, add the most recent data collection period to the drop-down menu, et cetera. So there are some sort of manual changes that I have to do each time. That's okay because it does give us some time to test the new dashboards and make sure we have control over what we're providing. So some things to think about if your data are updated periodically. You want to think about your data structure, and I guess that's because, if you're using data to create a line chart or a scatter plot, the shape of the data that you're presenting may be different. You may want your categories and then some sort of, some summary of each category. Whereas if you're doing something like a bar chart or a histogram or things like that, you might have one row for each record in your data and then use that to create the visualization that you're presenting. So the shape of the data is important to think about, and then as you add more data collection points or more data, how will that shape change or accommodate that so that you can present your information. And another thing about that is I had an experience where when I initially developed the dashboards, I created, so we have 6 questions, and so I basically needed to create 6 dashboards to present the information from each question. And when I initially did that, I created a separate Excel spreadsheet as the source for each dashboard. And the variable names were a little bit different in each of the Excel spreadsheets. So that worked okay for the first time that we presented the information, but the second time when I had to add new data points, new information, and then update the dashboards, it became a real chore to update all 6, actually all 12 dashboards, because we did 6 questions by facility type and 6 questions by geographic region. So I had to change my process to have basically one large spreadsheet be the source for all of the visualizations. So just something kind of we learned as we went along, but could have made our lives easier if we had thought of it up front. Another consideration is if you want to make comparisons, over time, especially if you want to compare one time period to another, how are you going to create your visualizations so that as you add more and more time periods, the visualization will grow and still be effective and useful? That's something we've really struggled with, so if you have any suggestions, we'd really be interested in your thoughts on that. And then finally, don't forget to test each update. Even though we've done it 4 times, each time something different comes up that we need to deal with, so we try to build in a lot of time to test our new dashboards before making them public. Okay, I'm going to try to go through this quickly so I can turn it over to Amy. The final requirement I wanted to talk about is we wanted to present unabridged data. So as I said, we wanted to make all comments available to the users, which was challenging. And So, you know, it was presenting qualitative data on an interactive dashboard, and we're still struggling with that. And if you've found any good ways of doing that and have any good examples of how to present qualitative data, both either in a static form or on an interactive dashboard, we'd really be interested to hear from you. We'll provide our contact information at the end, or if you fill out the evaluation survey after, there's a specific question on there where you can provide that information. So some general thoughts about that. What is the user's point of entry to your data? As I showed with our dashboards, we made the decision that the point of entry is either by facility type or geographic region. We've had a lot of comments from users that want to, say, start with an occupation and say, what's going on with the registered nurses in the state? And the way we presented the data, that's a little bit hard to do. You know, you have to go into one of the questions, select a facility type, kind of scroll through the occupations, and okay, here are registered nurses, and now I can start getting information about those and look at comments from around the state. But really, it was kind of an ease of use decision in that we have over 54 occupation categories plus all the write-in occupations. So finding a way to make that useful and navigate, you know, make it easy to navigate for the users was an issue for us, and it continues to be an issue. And then the last question I wanted to talk about is how much interpretation should you provide? In our case, we wanted to allow our partners to do most of the interpretation, so we were, you know, we continue to struggle with that. You know, for example, do you want to define how, you know, if you're presenting proportions, how much information do you want to give about how your denominator was calculated? If you're presenting a model, how much information do you want to give about the assumptions or the variables included? Or, you know, if you're presenting information over time, how much information do you want to give about, say, policy changes that occurred during that time period that could affect your data? And basically, it's a question of, you know, presenting the data in the dashboard, but also giving the user the information to correctly interpret that data. So I'm going to turn over to Amy now.
Thanks, Ben. So one of the things I wanted to touch on was kind of our situation at the University of Washington with our Tableau options. As Ben mentioned, we had a couple options for how we wanted to present, what tool we wanted to use to present our visualizations. One factor, of course, was privacy. At the University of Washington, we have Tableau servers that are hosted through the university, and at the time we have 3 options that the UW provides us. So depending on how you want to present your data, who you're presenting to, and what kind of privacy you're interested in, a situation like this, we had kind of a few ways to go. First of all, the university offers a transitional server, which is meant to be sort of a sandbox area where you would test your visualizations and your dashboards in advance of sending them into production. The university also offers what they call their production server, which is really meant for internal users only. When we were first building our visualizations, they actually only offered the first 2. So we did kind of come into a situation where we had started doing Tableau visualizations, but we're going to not have a real place to host them because we wanted them available to the public. At the time, though, the university was just deploying their public server, which is similar in some ways to what you might find in the general Tableau public server, where you can post, anybody can upload a visualization to Tableau public, but the general Tableau public server does not protect your data source. It also doesn't give you a lot of control over the branding. You're going to have a little Tableau logo on your dashboards and things like that. So we were really fortunate in that at the time we were finalizing our dashboards, the UW offered this sort of perfect kind of niche public server that would allow us to upload our data and our visualizations in a protected way, but also make the visualization part of it available to anybody. by embedding it on our website. Going back to kind of one step back from that, talking about our survey tool, I just wanted to touch on a couple things. As Ben mentioned, Qualtrics is kind of the in-house tool that we've used for a long time. There are also, of course, other options out there like RedCap, things like SurveyMonkey. Qualtrics is really pretty much the kind of the gold standard for survey tools. It has a really nice graphic user interface, so you don't really need any kind of programming skills to use it. You have a lot of options for design, and it really does a very nice job of guiding you through the survey development process. On the other side of things, we did run into some issues where, because it's using this very graphics-intensive interface, as our survey got larger and more complex, we found that the load time was increasing and increasing. So for our users and for our administrators, as we were developing the dashboard, we found that we had to wait quite a long time sometimes for the dashboard to load. And we did have reports from our users that the dashboard could be that Qualtrics could be very slow to load the surveys. So that's something to consider, is that even though you have a really nice interface from Qualtrics, the price you pay often in most software applications is that you have a lot of heavy lifting that the software has to do, and in this case, the web browser has to do to load everything for you. So that's something to consider as well. If you do have people who are experienced with developing surveys, particularly coding surveys from a programming language level, Qualtrics doesn't let you kind of play with its programming very much. So if you find that you want to do a particular thing with Qualtrics and it's not already built in, you're probably going to hit a wall. There's not a whole lot you can do to manipulate how the surveys function from a coding point. You have to really work with the interface. So those are just things to consider. This came up in our case because of the way we were rolling forward a user's choices in previous questions. At some point, we couldn't keep rolling them forward for additional questions, so we needed to do a lot of manual logic building for each option. So that became very, very tedious, particularly with the heavy loading time. There may be other ways to do it now in the years since we've really kind of worked on the survey structure, but that's just something I want to bring up about kind of the trade-off of having a really high-quality graphic interface versus maybe a much more bare-bones sort of structure that lets you get into the actual programming of the survey. Last thing to talk about is kind of the web hosting side of it. As Ben mentioned, we're really fortunate with Tableau. It's very web-friendly. It's very easy to move your dashboards to a website by just inserting a simple script that references from the Tableau server. So it's really quite easy to put that onto the web. You do have to consider that you do need, of course, a web host. You need a website in a place to put this so that it's available on the internet. In our case, our website was hosted by our funder. So the pros to that is there's no additional cost or setup. It was already made for us. One thing I just want to point out is that depending on how you have your website set up, you do have to work within the constraints of your host and the website domain that you're hosted on. So there may be things to think about design-wise in how you set up your dashboards to work with whatever host that you're launching from. So just something to consider for your visualization building. The last thing I guess we want to talk about is cost. Just to go back again to Tableau and Qualtrics, these are premium applications, so they do come at premium cost. Tableau, for us anyway, actually I didn't realize that R was so expensive to get kind of the full meal deal. But for Tableau, through the university, in our case, we paid roughly $1,100 for a one-time license fee, and that gives us access to all of the Tableau tools that we could want or use. And then from there, we pay a maintenance fee in the neighborhood of $30 or $40 a month for Tableau. And that's the contract that we have through the university. Of course, Tableau is a very expensive product, particularly for individuals or research projects, so how that works out for you could be quite different. Domain and web hosting these days is not overly expensive. It does take time to develop and test, of course, and then design and marketing, depending on how much you want to put into it, can be very, very rewarding and very beneficial for your different projects, depending on how much time and money you can put into it. I guess, so kind of to wrap it up, if you find our slides online, these are just some resources about Tableau. If you want to read more about kind of the UW structure of Tableau servers, there's a link as well, and then a link to Qualtrics to learn more about that survey software. And again, WashingtonSentinelNetwork.org. I'm Amy Clark, Web Computing Specialist for the University of Washington, and Ben Stubbs, Research Scientist.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Amy. That was very interesting. I especially like a lot of the details you give on the deployment. And overall, it was a very well thought out presentation. With that said, we are approaching the top of the hour. Can y'all stick around for a few minutes to get a few Q&As in?
Yes, yeah, that would be fine. Sorry we took a little longer than planned.
That's okay. I thought about speeding you up, but it was so interesting. I didn't want to stop you. It's a lot of great detail because I know a lot of people are, in the process of deploying similar dashboards. I say a lot of people. We are, for one, and I know other organizations are as well. So getting this much detail, it was fantastic. So at this point in time, we will open it up to questions and answers from the audience. So if you have a question, feel free to use your chat panel. And for those of you who need to run off to another meeting, as always, we are recording this event, and we will be posting it to our webinar, to our website shortly, so you can see what takes place afterwards in terms of the Q&A. So to go ahead and start out with, Ben, knowing what you do now, what would you do differently? That is, if you were going to do it all over again, if you had to design and deploy your dashboards again, what would you do differently?
Well, I think, I briefly touched on some of the design considerations that we talked about initially, but I think one thing I would do differently is if we could try to bring in some of the partners and users of the data from the very beginning and make that, bring them along with the design decisions. I think one difficulty with our situation is that there are so many different types of users. It's not like we're providing this dashboard for a certain customer that can give us all the answers we need. But, that type of input and work from the very beginning, I think would have helped us come up with some solutions that are maybe even, probably better than what we currently have, but also could have headed off some of the struggles we had as we were trying to update the dashboards, et cetera. Amy, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I think for my part, my biggest challenge, honestly, has been working to get exactly what we need out of Qualtrics. And I probably, even for this upcoming round, I may go back and do some structural redesigns of the survey just to see if there's a way to do it better. And I don't pretend to be an expert at Qualtrics. It's just at the time we did kind of hit a couple of bumps in the road using it, and I think maybe this time, since we have a little bit more leeway, we have a chance to redesign that. I think it could be better.
All right, thank you. And that really does lead me right to my next question. Ben, during your presentation, you mentioned that you brought in consultants for feedback on your dashboard. Exactly who did you bring in? Were these web developers? And I think you already hit on it a little bit. Did you also later on have like focus groups for the Sentinels themselves, et cetera? Could you just kind of hash out that process a little bit more? Because I know one of the things we're struggling with some of the visualizations we're developing is kind of getting good feedback on it.
Yeah, we were very lucky, just sort of serendipitously were connected with a consulting group locally that has experience with creating online dashboards, but also, it just was a perfect match, also with creating partnerships between users and presenters of data. So we were able to connect with that group and get some really great suggestions, not only on the details of how to design a dashboard more effectively and present it using some, modern web design techniques, et cetera, or considerations at least, but also help with, how do we leverage that to work more closely with our partners and continue that partnership. And then, yes, you're right, we did, after, I believe it was after the second data collection round, we asked our users to provide some feedback on how they're using the data, what improvements could we make, And so I think that was a very useful effort to do. And like I said, you know, if I had to do it over, I think it would be great if we could have done that from the very beginning and, you know, could have avoided some of the problems we came up with.
Thank you. Here's another question for you. In your experience working with Tableau, you mentioned already that it's relatively easy to learn and you can develop some fairly good-looking data visualizations, as you've just shown to us. But what would you describe as Tableau's biggest limitations? That is, was there a case where you wanted to do a visualization that you just couldn't because Tableau was too clunky?
Well, yeah, there were, you know, a couple, you know, I think our process is we start out with kind of a drawing on paper of what we want to do and then see if we can get Tableau to do that for us. For the most part, I think we were successful. There were a few features that were hard to master. You know, when I showed the examples, it starts out with the user sees one set of bar charts and then clicks on something, and then that brings up another. Controlling that behavior was a little bit hard in Tableau. I will also say that because Tableau is a GUI-based system, it's a lot of kind of dragging things around and almost kind of not really drawing, but, you know, using the mouse to create the visualizations. It's not something that you're coding on, you know, on a coding line. So that can make it a little bit hard for me, at least. I'm used to kind of coding in R and writing something out and kind of at least knowing basically what it's going to do. But sometimes with Tableau, if you don't do things in the right order, it would do things that I wasn't expecting, at least. I'm sure that's partly because I was learning it as I went. So I would say sometimes that was a difficulty. But Tableau does have some great online forums that really provide a lot of information about how to do different things, and actually it's a relatively friendly environment to ask questions compared to some of the online forums that I've used in, you know, for other tools. And so very supportive, and I was able to get, you know, a lot of questions answered that way.
Yeah, that might be one thing to think about when you're choosing a tool is how big is the community around the tool. If you have a tool that's not very well known or not very well used, you're going to be kind of, you know, on your own when you have questions. But if you're picking something that's pretty well developed like Tableau, odds are you're going to be able to find a lot of answers online or interact with a community that will be able to give you some help.
Actually, that's a very good point, Amy. Now, this next question, I guess we've already touched on it here and there, but if you really, and this is to both of y'all, if you really had to describe what was your most difficult technical challenge, what would it be?
I guess for me, the thing I think about that frustrates me and that's been difficult has been working with Qualtrics. I don't mean to kind of drag on Qualtrics. I think it's an excellent survey tool. I think for our purposes, we became very complex in the way that we wanted to structure the survey flow. And I think because Tableau didn't quite meet that particular niche need that we had, it became difficult to use and required a lot of kind of manual logic building. And then again, as I mentioned, because it was a large, complex survey, trying to work within just that graphic interface and having that load time be kind of long was probably the biggest challenge I had.
And I would say from my perspective as kind of the data processor and the kind of main person working on creating the dashboards, I had a little bit of trouble with the way that Qualtrics spit out the data, and it's nothing to do with Qualtrics. It's just that the branching and sort of options that we had to build into the online survey meant that what I receive is a spreadsheet with over 18,000 columns, and that's because for each facility type, Qualtrics provides all of the options that go along with that. I'm not sure if I'm explaining that very well, but sort of wrangling the data to put it into the format we needed was a bit of a challenge.
Wow, that's quite a few columns there. I know we have We have as you may know, we also have a health workforce data collection inventory, and we collect that information via survey using Qualtrics. And I thought we had a large spreadsheet to look at. Well, I stand mistaken.
Yeah, I think it's just based on the way that the user can navigate through the survey that we created. It just creates a lot of variables that we need to keep track of.
Yeah, that's how the data collection, that's how our survey was too. There's so many different permutations of it. Only a few questions really, but just different permutations. And I don't really see any more questions from the audience, so I'm going to ask you one more question to both of you, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up. And this is really a big picture question. What has been your most difficult non-technical or big picture challenge with regards to this project?
Well, I can start with that. I think hopefully I did an okay job of explaining, the purpose of the Sentinel Network and how it's different from other, data collection activities. I think one of our biggest challenges has been explaining that and sort of explaining how to take the data dashboards that we've used and interpret the information correctly. Like I said, there's kind of a temptation. Someone may say, okay, what is the one occupation that's really, people are really having difficulty filling positions for that occupation? But our methodology and process isn't really set up to answer that question. So how do we help our users understand sort of the unique aspects of what we're doing and how to correctly interpret the information? I think that's been really an ongoing struggle, and something we're still dealing with.
Yeah, I think pretty much just what Ben said, and then, the idea of building visualizations around qualitative data, not quantitative data, is always can be difficult to wrap your head around, so trying to make sure we have that balance of numbers and also the qualitative data in all of the things we display has been kind of part of that.
Okay, well, once more, Ben, Amy, I thought that was a wonderful presentation. Thank you for providing it to us. And for those of you in the audience, thank you for attending. Just to let you know, we will be posting our slides shortly to our website. So if you want to download them, check back very quickly at healthworkforceta.org. We hope to see you again in the future. Thank you, and have a good day.